Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this digital web session on the topic of Discover Your Datasets, the Self-Service Data Roadmap. This is the session 1 of 4, so make sure you're registered for the other ones that are taking place in March, April, and May. My name is Kwok, and I'm from Unravel. I'm joined today by a couple of very esteemed guests. The first one is Unravel's CDO and VP of Engineering, Sandeep Uttamchandani. Have I pronounced that correct? Perfect. And Floyd Smith, Product Marketing Director. Before we start, here are some quick housekeeping rules. If you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the question box below the player, type in your question, and we'll be able to answer them at the end of the session or during the session, during the Q&A section. If you are watching on demand, feel free to email us. We'll provide some emails at the end of the session for you guys to send in your questions. This webinar is available on demand, like I said, so if you do have to drop out, feel free to come back and listen at the same link and listen at your leisure. Let us know what you think about this session. Add in any comments, rate it. If there's any topics that you'd like us to cover in the future, feel free to pop them into the comments box and we'll get right onto them. So without further ado, I'm going to hand off to Floyd. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kwok. Excellent. Okay, well, this is, in a sense, the easiest technical presentation I've ever given because we are looking at 10 slides, and we're just going to have a question and answer back and forth with Sandeep. So the webinar is the Self-Service Data Roadmap, and we're in conversation with Sandeep Uttamchandani, our CDO and VP Engineering here at Unravel Data. And he's written this book, so this will not be an Unravel Data presentation. It'll be thought leadership around what Sandeep has committed 2 pages. Now, I deal a lot with words. My job is largely to explain technology to our partners, customers, and so on. So I wondered, the self-service data roadmap, is that self-service data or self-service roadmap for data? And it turns out, I actually asked Sandeep about this, and it's the roadmap to self-service data. So you're creating a self-service data infrastructure. Fortunately, the book also applies to a number of more medium-sized projects that might ultimately roll into a self-service data capability across your organization. So this can be by department, and it can be some of the pieces. The basic framework that Sandeep introduces actually works right across a range of projects. It's fractal. It works at the small scale and at the large scale. So it's really a great thing to understand and learn, really orienting for you with other people on your team, as I'll mention later. So I'm going to start by letting Sandeep introduce himself. I'll then introduce myself and talk a bit more, and then we'll be into the Q&A. So take it away, Sandeep, and here you are.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Floyd. So excited folks to be here. In terms of introduction, basically I'm a data geek, been in this space for more than 2 decades, and really sort of played various different roles. Have been involved, in the early phases when having 1 petabyte of storage was a big deal. This is in the early 2000s. I've been also fortunate to be involved with streaming analytics, before Spark existed. So actively building out products and projects. This was part of being at IBM. And basically over the years, I would basically say I have touched on the entire spectrum. On one extreme, the infrastructure aspects, to the other extreme, really building out a startup in machine learning, data analytics, and eventually then becoming a part of Intuit, driving the Intuit QuickBooks entire data from the transactional data sets to the data lake to the infrastructure that fueled the analytics and machine learning pipelines. And now more recently at Unravel, where the mission, which I have believed throughout my career, is democratizing the data platform across all the personas, not just for the analysts and the data scientists, but really for everyone in the company. And Unravel really is on the same mission, which was really the prime motivation to continue my passion here at Unravel. I'll talk more about my motivation of the book later on, but really excited. Over to you, Floyd.
Okay, thank you. I will point out that this is the slide where we have the link to the book, where you can see the book description online, and happy for you to look at that during the presentation to gather information for your own questions. So please enter questions in, and we will work those in with our own questions as much as we can. But this slide 2 is the link with the book. Also, this webinar will be available on demand shortly after it's over from BrightTalk, I think immediately. They're very good with that. So you can always come back to this. If you missed some of it, something you want to see again, share with your colleagues, send a link to people who might want to watch it on tape delay, as we used to say afterward. Please do. Also, I will mention that Sandeep is one of the nicest people and the leader of our considerable engineering organization. We have quite a machine, quite a global machine on the engineering side, and it's an amazing group to work with. So I'm honored to be working with all of them. For myself, I'm the director of product marketing. So the product is called Unravel Data, just the same as with the company, so common with us startups. Eventually, I'm sure we'll have a range of products. And please write me. I also want to mention that we have a bit of a special opportunity for some of you who are CDOs or in that role at the end of the webinar, and I'll bring that up at the time. So please, my email address will be on the last slide as well. So if you're interested in that, you can follow up with me there. All right, so the self-service data roadmap, I want to talk a little bit about the book, and then we'll engage Sandeep in the Q&A. So first of all, spoiler from deep within the book. When you do machine learning coding, when you do a machine learning project, and we'll talk more about this, only 5% of the time is actually spent writing the code for the machine learning model. To produce the machine learning model. And 95% of it is everything else, including all the everything else's that we'll be talking about today and in the remaining 3 seminars. And then I had a little joke to share that, as you can see, the self-service data roadmap cover, it's an animal book, which is the prestigious line of O'Reilly books that really have core technical information without any kind of fluff around them. It's just what you need to know to get the work done. This is, of course, at a very high level because it's project management from someone who can get down in the weeds and also sit at the CXO level and do strategic planning, everything in between. The animal is a bat, so I'm now calling Sandeep Batman, which he does not appreciate, but maybe his kids would. And the book focuses on what you need to do to achieve data-driven insights. And so what's data-driven insight, just if you're getting oriented to the field, just means that the machinery, often including machine learning and AI, produces next steps in a decision chain. So it feeds you steps in a decision chain. If you're working at a car share company like an Uber or Lyft, then you are positioning drivers in advance of a busy workday. But it's a holiday, so do you do fewer drivers? Are more people or fewer people available? What do you pay and when do you do surge pricing? You know, are there bonuses for your drivers? All of that, that's all data-driven insights, and they go in 2 directions. One is into the app, which will actually tell drivers, you know, what the demand is and tell passengers what the availability is. So that's the live app that we see as consumers or the drivers see a separate version of. But there's also going within the company, like how was our utilization on a given day? What countries are we short on drivers in? What countries are we short on riders in? You know, and that all goes into marketing and planning. So all of those are insights, whether they're viewed by a human on a dashboard or fed into an app that a user interacts with. And of course, there's time constraints, especially for the app. You know, you have no time at all, right? Things have to be showing up as they happen with a very, very short. Have you ever sat there before the pandemic, maybe with an Uber and a Lyft, refreshing your screen, trying to see how close the car is to you? That's how short a time you have to get these things out. So that's the app example. It's also the business intelligence example, because that's how those companies run their business, as well as delivering their their service to people. They've got it all integrated. Similarly for your Netflixes and your Amazons, all those companies we've heard about, and now the next tier, many companies you have not yet heard about, but will. And now I'm just going to briefly describe what we've got on the slide here, because Sandeep will be using it for reference as we go along. So the big picture, a figure from the book. The big picture is that the self-service data roadmap, it describes four major steps, four big picture steps for any large-sized data project, usually in what's called the big data area. So those steps, I'll just summarize, are discover, what am I doing here? And what do I need to do it? Prepare, build, and operationalize. Now, there are a total of 18 specific steps described in the book that fit into these four categories, and Sandeep will be talking about them. Of course, we're focused on the discover stage today, and so we'll talk some about the book as a whole, then we'll drill down into the discovery phase, and one service in particular is an example of Sandeep's approach. So I'm going to start by, so thank you for letting me spend all this time to introduce us, and let me now engage with Sandeep, the man himself. At the table of contents level, Sandeep, what would you say, what got you to do the book? What was the seed for, I'm sure you've been working with these ideas for a long time, what was the seed for making them into book form?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of the motivation, basically, I have basically, think of this as end of the day, when you're responsible for making machine learning, data analytics, any kind of value projects with data happen, there are basically four phases to it, right? The discover, prep, build, and operationalize. And through multiple projects, multiple years, one of the things I've realized is that there are no real silver bullets. There's nothing out there which can seamlessly just do it for every organization, every, I would say, team, where teams differ in terms of skill sets, maturity. Companies differ in terms of what data sets they have, what applications they are trying to build, so on and so forth. So the motivation of this book was, after struggling for years and really sort of being in this position where I was asking myself, what are the fundamental things that slow down any ML, AI, ML analytics project? What is basically, stopping the company or stopping a team to deliver these insights, high quality insights, in a timely fashion? And in this journey, what I basically realized is that when you think of any of these initiatives, right, these four building blocks, within these four building blocks, there are services that need to be in place within the platform. And the book in particular boils us down into 18 services. At the table of contents level, there are 18 chapters. And each chapter essentially is focusing on how to build a service such that this service can be used, both by data scientists, analysts, the data users, to make sure that this is not a bottleneck in the overall goal that they are trying to accomplish. So examples of services here, and this is what we'll probably double click on. An example would be, a metadata service, right? What should a metadata service have? What should basically be, I would say, the functionality that a data scientist, a data analyst, or a marketer, a product manager would want? So overall, that's the structure of the book, really geared towards how do we get the organization or the team or a project deliver a single metric, which is what I refer to as time to insights. How do you go from idea to insight? Insight here could be an ML model, could be a BI dashboard, could be anything. So that's a general structure, Floyd.
Okay. That's the structure that you got. Was there an aha moment where you either, well, two aha moments, either which might have occurred to you, either an aha moment when you realized that you were from your work putting together a big picture, and or an aha moment when you thought of specifically doing a book for O'Reilly? Your own insight.
Yeah. So the aha moment, folks, just to share my experience here. Essentially, a lot of the projects today, when it comes to data, they start with a lot of excitement, right? You can imagine if you're in the data space, either you're or the data engineering side, focusing on the platform, or you're on the side of making sense of data, which is data analysts, data users, ML engineers, and so on, right? End of the day, when these projects start, there's clearly a lot of, I would say, expectations on how quickly we need to deliver. Oftentimes, these projects are considered to be similar to software, the way we treat software projects, which is actually not the case, because data is messy, real world data, all the way from quality to getting it into a data lake to running the right analytics. There are lots of non-trivial steps involved. My aha moment, which really was the genesis of this book, is the following, which is to show progress. There's always this, I would say, to and fro between data users and the data engineers. Data users are looking to go fast. A data scientist would say, where is my data set? How do I prep this data? How do I wrangle this such that I'm getting these metrics that are standardized, so on and so forth. So they are focusing on the business problem, and they're looking at their counterparts in data engineering to say, folks, how can you simplify? Why is this taking so long, right? And again, so long is a relative term. One of the aspects which is true for many organizations is that data engineering teams are much smaller compared to the number of data scientists, analysts, and users. In fact, the ratios could be, 6:1, 10:1, depending on an organization. And the key aha moment in this whole philosophy, in this whole journey was, hey, look, at the data platform level, if we were to make these services available to the users to consume directly. So if you need to search a data set, instead of relying on tribal knowledge, instead of anecdotally going behind and asking for information from data engineers who may not be aware of this information themselves, what if there was a data search service that exists? And, and again, search has different levels of self-service, so to speak. So when I talk about self-service,
Yep.
I think of it as a self-driving car, right? Now, if you know self-driving cars, they actually have levels of automation. Today we are on level 4, and level 5 is the level at which no human involvement required. That's the level of self-driving. So in the same way, what I realized is that each service we're talking about, actually, there's no 0 or 1. In fact, my favorite analogy here is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So pretty much every chapter, you'll see this triangle, hierarchy of needs, where at the basic level, right, search service, what do we need? You basically need a way to index, gather data set and artifact information. And then on top of that, ranking, on top of that, access control. So the aha moment was converting the aspects that data users need from the platform into a collection of services, 18 services. You can actually get to a point where you will see your projects radically move fast. You would see the satisfaction of data users. In fact, the whole data-driven, which is a word which is thrown around. In fact, I refer to it as decision-driven data analysis. That is, you would want the company to leverage data for decision-making. That is getting enabled, or got enabled, in my experience, as we went from following the next shiny technology out there to systematically saying, okay, 18 services. For each service, let's see where we are. Let's look at what is stopping us, what our current status is, what our needs are. Maybe if you're a company of 5 people, you don't need a search service in the sense that you're relatively small with a handful of data sets. So again, the whole intent here is how to translate this problem such that when you're building this out as the abilities that you need, building out a scorecard, tracking your approach in terms of, okay, which of these services is a red, yellow, green, and then quarter over quarter, which is exactly what I did, focusing on a few of them, one or two of these services, and double downing on them, right? There are building blocks available today. Harnessing the right technology in the cloud or on-prem or open source, which is again the intent of the book. In the book, I talk about patents because technologies come and go. But end of the day, if you look at any product out there, it falls into one of the patents in terms of the functionality it provides. So long answer, Floyd, but the aha moment was this messy space of finger pointing between data users, data engineers, not really knowing where and how to break this problem down into converting it into a scorecard with 18 KPIs or 18 services, tracking where they are, and then systematically taking 1 to 2 of them every quarter, or depending upon the scale of the team. That has been the secret sauce, which is what I wanted to share in this book. In contrast to boiling the ocean, following, I would say, the next shiny technology. We were in this business where any that came out, we were just trying to invest in it, knowing how this is going to be used. End of the day, no impact. But that may not be the issue to begin with, from a time to insight standpoint. So that was really what led to this book.
Okay, thank you. And I think that description will help orient you all in the audience. We've got quite a lineup of not only our presenter, but actually of people attending. Pretty impressive. So please enter any questions of your own that we'll work in. And what I think Sandeep's description will do is that it will orient all of us. If you face, there's two ways you can deal with the kinds of questions that Sandeep raised. Either you have them, and you're looking at projects at the big picture level, and this framework makes sense to you. I'll talk more about that in a second. Or you've worked on projects and you've been doing things within these silos or even within specific services, and you want to know what the bigger picture is. What are you working on? What do other people in the problem-solving effort look for? How does the world look to them? So you can work better across functions. So those are a couple of different different ways to use this work. Also, I put an announcement, and I also put in the notes, we're going to be making the slides available after the webinar, and please consider downloading them, because Sandeep and I could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure that many of you could as well. We won't get to everything that we might talk about, but the notes at the bottom of the slide actually cover some topics that we won't be able to discuss live today, and again, get your questions to us as well. So what we're going to do, the purpose of this specific webinar now, is to look at the discover phase, which has a number of services associated with it. And then we'll look at a specific service, again, fractally, as an example of how Sandeep addresses all the services in the book. I'll mention one more thing before we dive in, which is that you can use this with a consultancy mindset. You can get people on your team oriented and say, okay, there's 4 silos here with projects in each silo, and you can vary them for your own environment. You can start with Sandeep's, but you can use phrases, or there may be additional steps in your organization. You can share that framework and get everyone to identify what they're going to be working on, what their responsibilities are within Sandeep's framework. Because it's deeply data-driven in the sense that Sandeep has done so many of these projects, but it's also in business, at a business level of understanding. So it's great for marshaling a complex team of people, or even just for keeping a small team organized on a smaller project. So diving in now.
Floyd, if I can just add one more aspect to that, is essentially when I wrote this book, there were three sets of personas or three sets of audience that I was gearing towards, right? One is definitely the data engineering persona, folks who are driving the data platform, which, to be honest, is the most critical piece of the puzzle. The plethora of ideas and projects, but without the platform, there's not much that can be done. So data engineers was one set of folks. The second set of folks that I was targeting was data scientists and data analysts looking to really gain a end-to-end understanding. In fact, most companies today are moving towards this notion of a full stack data scientist, right? Where the whole intent is not necessarily folks who are doing modeling and prototyping. In the past, there was this throw over the wall model where, once the basic analysis was done, a model was created on a small subset of data. To productionize it, it went to the data engineers, right? And the data engineers had the engineering context, but they did not have the business context, which was one of the aspects which tends to slow down most teams. This is where data scientists and analysts, in fact, in my experience, have been really interested in understanding more end to end. What happens on the other side? What happens when we're trying? So that was the second set of audience. And the third audience was really data architects. A lot of teams are thinking about not just their current state, but how do they strategize moving to the cloud, for instance? What does that mean? What are the services in the cloud? So especially for those folks, as they read this book, they'll be able to relate the 18 services that I talk about to the kinds of offerings that are available in any cloud provider today. So that would be the third audience here. Just from the standpoint of thinking of this as a team effort, folks. Like one of the things with data is it's a team sport.
Yes, so if you think of it like a symphony orchestra, Sandeep also runs a podcast called CDO Battle Scars, which I'll share that in the notes at the bottom of the slides as well. And in this set of podcasts, he works with CDOs, so they're like the conductors, right? And so he's describing, like, you might have the woodwinds over here and the strings over there. And then you pull them all together and hopefully make beautiful music together is the idea. So let's dive into the Discover. Let's dive into the Discover silo. And this is the core focus of this webinar, is the Discover phase, which is just the areas underneath the Discover pipe. We will cover the other areas that are there for context. We'll be covering prep in our next webinar, then build in the third and operationalize in the fourth. Today, we're just on Discover, but you can see how these things all align with each other and how they interrelate and how people can talk past each other if they're working on different types of the problem, especially at a given time. So I'm just going to give Sandeep one question on this slide, which is please describe the areas of the functional steps that you're taking in the Discover phase.
Totally. So, Discover tends to be the beginning of any project. Imagine this is the beginning part where, let's say, as a data analyst, you're looking to get a report on potentially, the number of fraudulent transactions that are happening. Or as a data scientist, you're looking to build a model to predict transactions which are fraudulent or predict the customer support that resources that you would need or the propensity of a specific feature, whatnot, right? Everything starts with discovery. And in the discovery phase, you're really looking at, hey, what do I have here to work with, right? So what that basically translates to is a few things. The first off, you really need to find what exists. Now, what you're seeing on the slide is the 18 services that I was mentioning, right? So if you sum all the boxes up there, now the way to read this slide is the day, the success of the project is to go from the very beginning to the other extreme of it, that is going to discover, prep, build, and operationalize. And I measure that end-to-end time as the time to insight. So for every project, my focus is what is the time to insight for this project, right? How much time did it take? And that time to insight is basically a summation of each of these individual times, right? So if you look at the time the project took, time to insight, you'll start off by time to find. How much time did we spend finding the data sets, finding relevant artifacts? Artifacts here could be existing ETLs, existing dashboards, right? So that's the way to think about it. Several projects have been a part of. Time to find can be matter of months. Again, the bigger the organization, the more the silos, these things all vary. Followed by finding what's there. So you found your data set, right? The next biggest thing is, what does this data set mean? So if I go back to the example of, let's say we are building a model to predict customer support calls that we would get on a given on a given day, right? Let's say we found the data set on previous call logs, product requests, products that correspond to each of these calls that came in, type of support individuals in terms of their skills. These are all data sets, right? Now, the reality, though, is that these data sets, interpreting what an attribute means, is the number one gotcha I have seen. And a lot of funny examples where fields were completely misinterpreted and used in a way which was completely incorrect, right? I wouldn't go in those, but hopefully you get that picture. So time to interpret is all in the context of a metadata catalog service, right? So that's the service behind time to interpret. The first one, time to find, is related with respect to a search service, right? Good examples here are, like, for instance, Lyft has Amazon. In Google, you have the Google catalog service. These are all services that correspond to these building blocks. Now, once you're able to interpret, which again can take quite a lot of time, the next come is what you refer to as features. So now this is specific to ML models. As most of you, yeah.
Sandeep, just alert. I want to tell the audience what I'm going to do. Please take a quick second and look closely across this whole slide and see in general what the steps are, because I'm about to switch slides, and I'll tell you what that is. So I'm going to these 5 areas under Discover map to specific services. So I'm going to swap, as Sandeep's talking now, to the slide actually showing the specific services. So look here at how the Discover silo fits in with the others. And now here's a double click on the Discover silo. So these are the services that map to those. So use the slide before to talk to your management about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Use this slide to organize your technical team around what specifically they've got to do. What are the goods they have to deliver? Which of them might already be partly or done, and which need a ton of work. So please continue, Sandeep, with the services slide showing.
Fantastic. And thanks for that, Floyd. So folks, again, just to weave the context back in the Discover, as I was in the earlier slide, we're breaking it down into measurable times, right? Time to find, time to interpret, right? And to give you an example here, or just to sort of weave this back in, if it's taking a very long amount of time to interpret data, right? This is where metadata comes in. In fact, folks who have been following, new companies and new startups coming in, metadata has been a hot topic over the last few months, and rightfully so, because the action kind of is shifting from, okay, I have the data set. What does this data set mean, right? So that's where the metadata service comes in. And that's the service we will be double clicking in the webinar. So I'll come back to it. Once the data is found and understood, then it's a matter of, especially for the ML space. So if it's an ML model typically involves multiple input features that go in the model. So a feature could be a form of, like, for instance, if you're predicting a classic, 101 example here would be, if you're predicting the prices of homes, your input features would be, which zip code, number of rooms, square footage, right? These are all features that feed into the model. So feature store service is again something that's getting really popular, because what is happening otherwise is when you build these models, every model starts from scratch, versus if these features existed. And a feature here basically is a function, a pipeline, which can be used both for training and inference purposes. So that's the feature source service, and I'll just keep continuing in the interest of time.
Yep.
Now, with Discover, the next thing that comes in after data is found is that data typically is never where it should be, right? What I mean by this is, yes, we have data lakes, but data lakes don't ingest everything today. There's a percentage of data that actually goes to the lake, and oftentimes you'll run into data sets. In fact, data scientists find data sets sitting in really obscure transactional databases, sitting in, I would say, Salesforce records, for instance, right? And that data needs to be moved. So that's where the data movement service comes in. Now, on the surface, it appears easy. Hey, we're just moving data from a data store into a lake, or maybe data store A to data store B for analysis, right? Maybe I'm converting this into a key value store. But the ground realities of a data movement service are very different. Not because it's a difficult problem, but it has to be done consistently. This is not a one-time operation. Data needs to be constantly moved, hourly, daily, and a lot of issues, a lot of quality problems come in. And again, having a service which is available, it can always be a Jira ticket ping pong between a data user and a data engineer. But the best approach here is a service that can be applied, which is what a data movement service would be. And again, there are examples, AWS, DMS, and so on, that are kinds of highlights here. And the last one is the clickstream. And the reason I called clickstream is a kind of data. Again, the data can be of various forms: structured, unstructured, semi-structured. And again, within that context, there are a lot of moving parts. Clickstream deals with more of the behavioral data. And in my experience, this has been one of those areas where a lot of time is spent. It needs special handling with respect to how do you aggregate them, build the right beacons or instrumentation. How do you enrich this data with things like bot filtering, IP to geo, sessionization, and so on. So these 6 services, just to sum it up, are the ones which are a crux of the discover phase, and obviously the sum of these services through what I was referring to earlier: time to find, time to search, time to featureize. As you apply or look at your own organization, starting off by saying, where is the most time spent, right? You probably don't need to invest in all these. Start by what's taking the most time across the most recent 10 projects that have happened in the analytics and ML team. So that's the intent here. These chapters are standalone. You can pick them in any order based on your pain point. There's no real sequence here. So that's the sum up here, folks.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm going to put this in the announcements. And I'm actually displaying this announcement now, which is the web home for Sandeep's podcast, CDO Battle Scars. And I'm also putting this in the notes, so you'll have it if you download the slides. And CDO Battle Scars podcast, Sandeep talks about a range of topics. And when I describe it as his podcast, it's actually his and a range of CDOs that are doing a variety of interesting projects. So I recommend that to you if you're interested in these topics. And again, I'll stop displaying the announcement now, but it's in the notes so that you can click from there to the podcast itself. I'm also going to make a mention of done some management consulting before, and I'm laughing because this framework can actually be used for a management consulting project. I'd have to adapt it a bit, but it's at the right level of detail for a medium-sized or large project, which is great. So you just see how flexible it is. Now, as I mentioned fractally, we're just going to talk about one specific service, the first service in this silo, in the Discover silo, which is the metadata service. And this is a hot area. A lot of people are coming out with tools, and it's a big topic of discussion. Is the metadata existing? Is it enriched? Is it created in real time, at read time? Please talk us through a little bit how the metadata service might work and how people may be. I just came from the database world a few years ago. Please talk how people with a relational or a NoSQL mindset might look at this a little differently and how they can speak together with each other.
Absolutely. So first of all, folks, there's definitely a lot of noise related to metadata. Like Floyd was mentioning, clearly a hot area. And when the area gets hot, there's a lot of FUD that floats around, right? So I think one of my goals here, and again, just being a technologist, is to really break it down into first principles and fundamentals, right? So when you think of metadata, I think of metadata to consist of three categories or three broad buckets. The first bucket is what I refer to as the technical metadata, right? Metadata, just to set the context, is all in the service of helping understand and leverage the data appropriately, right? So you have a data set, you have these metrics, you want to leverage them. This is where metadata comes in. And the three buckets of metadata, which are important to understand, the first one is what I refer to as the technical metadata, right? It consists of what you would refer to as details in terms of the physical layout, timestamps, physical location, logical schema, so on and so forth. Things which you need to know to touch a data set, right? Is it sitting, obviously, is it in Parquet format? Is it ORC file? What's the location, where we are sort of tracking this in the data lake? Are there partitions created? What kind of modification timestamps are we tracking? So on and so forth. So that's the technical metadata. Think of this as the bread and butter. Without this metadata, there's very little use of the data set. Even if someone said, hey, there is this great data set out there with all the customer support calls, going back to the model example I was giving earlier. So technical metadata. Second kind of metadata is what I refer to as the operational metadata. Now, most places have got good on the technical metadata side, layout, schema, and so on. Operational metadata is where there is quite a lot of action. So a lot of the companies that are coming in are focusing on the operational metadata. What that basically means is essentially tracking two key aspects. The lineage, where is this data coming from, right? I don't care the fact that this metric is there, these records exist, but did these records get created from some other database with some ETL transformation that happened on top of it? How exactly? It's like, the finding the tracking the history of individuals, for instance. Where were they born? What happened? Where did they go to school? So that's the example of lineage. Combined with lineage is also profiling, data profiling. So in the operational bucket, what you need to understand is, in terms of the column level characteristics, what is the range of values? What are the typical processing times? What are typical sizes? If the data is ingested, every hour or every day, typically how many records get adjusted historically for specific weeks, for specific seasons? So that's all the operational metadata. And operational metadata plays a critical role in answering the question, is this data set reliable, right? Because to be honest, we are currently floating in a lot of data. There's no dearth of data. There is dearth of reliable data, which is where the operational metadata plays a key role. And the third piece of metadata, which is in my mind equally important, is what I refer to as the team metadata, or the tribal data, tribal information that the team gathers, the team knowledge. So oftentimes, in my experience, again, playing the role on the data analytics and data science side, is information about these data sets sits with the users who have used them. They have these copious notebooks. In fact, I have some very, again, interesting examples here where for every question I used to have, someone had this notebook there to bring it up, and so, oh, that data set, it actually refers to this specific business vocabulary or this specific business taxonomy, and so on, right? So the metadata, which is, and again, you can call this as a team knowledge, tribal knowledge, it goes by various words. It's all about user-defined metadata, annotations, documentation, descriptions of attributes they may have, business taxonomy, vocabulary that they have built in, and so on. And there's an aspect of ML augmented metadata, which is again another topic in terms of can machine learning map and generate or gather this knowledge to map it back. So going back, when you think of metadata, think of three buckets: technical, operational, tribal, or the team knowledge metadata. And for each of these three buckets, basically a service, going back to the essence of what this book is trying to bring across, right? So the picture that you're seeing here, what it's trying to highlight is that for a given data set, this data set has gone through multiple systems, right? Mapping back to Floyd's question, if you're coming from the relational world, right? The world 20 years back, right? And I was part of that world as well, right? We had a database. If you looked at the big three databases, they had all the services within them, right? So when you think of a database, it had, metadata catalog aspects, because at the time we were doing, schema on write, which is at the time of writing the data into the warehouse, you need to have a schema, right? Obviously in the data lake world, it is schema on read, just throwing data unstructured, structured. We'll make sense of it later on when we try to make use of it, right? So in that world, these services, in fact, broadly, not just the metadata service, but the services that are being covered in this book were kind of all built in as a single appliance. And what has happened today in the big data world is that there has been an explosion. That is, these services are today piecemeal put together, and there are no right or wrong choices. It all depends on what you're trying to do, right? If you're a streaming heavy company, you'll be relying a lot on Kafka. If you're batch oriented, looking more at the descriptive analytics, right? Again, analytics or insights come in different flavors. On the one extreme, you have descriptive, what's happening with my business, to diagnostic, why it is happening, to predictive, what will happen next, to prescriptive, what should I be doing? This is where decision intelligence comes in. And again, every company is in a different phase. Folks may just care about the what is happening with their business. Most of the time, that's the building block. Or let's put it this way: if you cannot answer what's happening with your business, forget about predicting what's going to happen. So that's another pattern you should watch out for as practitioners, of putting the cart in front of the horse, right, so to speak. So going back, folks, what you're seeing in this picture is really that there are multiple building blocks that get involved when it comes to how your pipeline looks like, right? So at the bottom are your data stores. These data stores persist the data. There are pipelines built on it using various systems like Oozie, Airflow, and whatnot. And then on top of that, you basically have different kinds of query engines. In fact, query engines, again, a huge number of choices out there. And the metadata, the three buckets I was talking about, it actually does not live in a single system. So in the old world, everything would be just one system. You had a data warehouse. It knew exactly at the time of ingestion, this is the case. Any transformation ran as a query. So everything was tracked right there. In this new world, the same data can be accessed through multiple query engines. There can be one or more different schedulers in play. There can be multiple data stores in play. So to understand a true metadata, you have to understand the metadata gathered from each of these systems, which is all different. The way Spark metadata would exist for a query execution would be different from how Airflow will manage the details of the operations of what happened in executing a specific pipeline. Hope you guys get a picture on that. So that's the context. The metadata service essentially brings together metadata from all the different pieces in your pipeline with the goal to answer these three questions. Where is the technical metadata? What is the operational metadata? Because these are the kinds of things which a data scientist, a data analyst, honestly any data user would need. So I'll just take a pause here. Floyd, does that make sense? Would you want me to click down on specific
I'm
aspects?
sorry, I had muted my mic to stop this motorcycle that's going by on the freeway nearby from making noise. So thank you for that, Sandeep. We got a good and relevant question from the audience. What are good so for the metadata service, what are good selling points to management to get support to start the metadata project? And so one of them, of course, is that it's a foundation for search. But what are other? How do you get management to understand that you need to spend time, effort, and energy on this?
That's a great question, and I understand the context as well. Oftentimes, folks who are looking at outcomes would not correlate the need for having a metadata service. So there are a couple of different ways to sort of motivate the need, right? First off is looking for projects where the teams potentially are spending a lot of time understanding data, right? This is one of those areas, and again, varies with organization, varies with the number of data sets you have, the kind of data sets you have. In fact, the way I look at it is, do you have a large number of small tables or a small number of large tables, right? What it basically means is the more data variety that you have in your organization, the more bigger teams of data users you have in an organization, the need for a metadata service increases with that, right? And one aspect here is oftentimes sharing with management examples where, because people did not understand what a specific field meant, we ended up misinterpreting a dashboard metric, which led to an incorrect business decision. And I have seen that several times in my experience. So I think that's one thing that definitely gets the attention. Anything that you can tie back. The one that I shared is my favorite one. The other way to tie it back is more a survey of your data users and really asking them questions along, do you understand the meaning of these data sets? How do you infer whether the data sets are reliable? Do you have a mechanism to do that? Do you often find yourself building on data sets which were not being refreshed? In fact, again, another example here is data sets appear to be around, and guess what? Somebody built it, and it's an orphan data set. Nobody is taking care of it, or nobody is sort of making sure that when changes happen upstream in the meaning of those attributes, they are propagated downstream. So, a real example here is simple things like a billing. What does new customer mean, right? The semantics of new customers. There could be several ways to define it, right? If an existing customer buys an additional product, does that count as a new customer or not? So sometimes these semantics change upstream without a metadata service. There's no way to track versions of what these definitions are, what was supposed to be the case. And guess what? The dashboards, tend to go all haywire. Debugging those take a lot more time. So I would basically say applying the debugging route or the overall time to insight as two possible ways.
So this is a great example in the interaction. Thank you so much for the question. Really, really appreciate it. And this illustrates what's going on in the whole book. And when you work with somebody who's been through this before and who can use a framework like the one in the book. So each service has certain milestones for understanding what you need in it, for getting it together, and for making it available to others in actual use. It's a ton of work. You have 4 big silos and 18 specific ones per service. Each chapter starts with a journey map for that service. And at the end of the chapter, Sandeep discusses in general terms how to make the different parts into a service. And there are levels for each. Again, this is fractal. We could drill down on this one service all day. We could have a discussion about this, and then there's still 18 more to go, arranged in these 4 silos. So I'm just going to break off a little bit there because we're running short on time, and I know we're all in a meeting world right now, especially with the pandemic, things start on time and people don't see you moving from one conference room to the next, right? So let me go to our second to last slide just before our conclusion.
Yeah. Floyd, very quickly, just 30 seconds on the metadata one, just to wrap up that chapter, right? So every chapter starts with a journey map followed by typical requirements, and in the end, I talk about patterns. What patterns do you need to build? And the reason I call patterns and not call out specific software instances is because different solutions vary or they go. Patterns constant, right? So in the metadata service, just to bring that topic home, the three buckets of categories of metadata, the patterns you need at the technical metadata side is what I refer to as the source specific connector pattern, right? That is information that is collected from the specific sources. So I talk about the connector patterns and examples of what exists out there. For the operational one, it's the lineage correlation pattern, and it talks about how it's built in terms of various different products out there that do this. And the last one for team knowledge is the tribal knowledge pattern in terms of what kind of portals, what kind of structures you can have in place for making it easy for teams to collaborate. So I think the key point here for the audiences would be really make sure you're mapping back your needs by breaking it down into these patterns and then going and looking for solutions out there, because I've really got burnt picking the wrong solution just because it was a shiny object and applying it. So yeah, that I just wanted to sum up there.
Well, great. Thank you. And we actually have a shiny object of our own that we're working on. We were able to, both Sandeep and myself have joined Unravel to help simplify data ops. And so Unravel Data is a platform that does a lot of this stuff for you. I'm not going to go into the details. We use AI as part of the machinery of the project. I was actually talking to our CEO a few days ago and said, doggone it, your minimum viable product for the original idea you had was pretty incredibly extensive. And he said, yeah, we picked as small a slice as we could and built out from there. And so that's the project, that's the journey that we're on here at Unravel. And our product, just to orient you, does not show up until the build and operationalize silos within these 4 silos that we're discussing. So I'll mention a little bit more about it further on, but really we want to stay at the big picture. This is also where I want to make an offer, which is, oh yes, and there's, will do. I want to mention an offer also that we want to make, which is that if you're working at this level and you have a big project, I'd like to discuss that with you, not from a product point of view, but more to understand what you're doing in your world and how these ideas might fit into it. And if it fits with what Sandeep's work on in the book, we'd get that involved as well. So it's not a salesy or even really a marketing presentation. It's more an exploration of ideas for us to learn more about what people out there in this world are doing and how we fit in. Unravel is very much involved in kind of a movement to put forward an emerging area called data ops. And data ops is similar conceptually to DevOps, but it's the intersection of the people who do the data work with operations. A lot of specifically AI and ML projects have been kicking around in the labs for a couple of years, and now they're getting operationalized. And darn, you look at something a whole different way when you're deciding whether or not someone's credit card swipe gets approved. That's a lot different than delivering management insights on a monthly basis from your database, right? You go from a month to do your work to milliseconds, right, to actually operationalize this stuff. So data ops is coming up, and we will include in the slide links a link. There may be an event on Wednesday, March 17th that we may be involved in, but details to follow. So that'll be in the a mention of that will be in the slides, and we'll be talking about that more on the Unravel website. And I will finish up it's 10:59, so I'm just going to drive on through to the end. Thank you. Please send me email, and I'm going on the last slide. Please send email to fsmith@unraveldata.com if you're working at this level and interested in furthering this discussion, and we'll link to the to a trial for our software in the notes from the slide deck. Okay, thank you guys very much. I appreciate your attention and involvement, and look forward to the next presentation in this series of webinars. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.